Hi folks, I'm sorry this is late. You'll have to bear with the scratchy throat at times. I'm still not feeling 100% anyway. This is to answer a couple of queries about how the pattern's written, and specifically the double crochet rows if you're using UK terminology, or single crochet if you're using US terminology. In particular, we're looking at row 1, for example. This particular pattern is in UK terminology, but please don't let that put you off. What the first row is asking you to do is chain 1, and she's specifically stating that this does not count as stitch, and then to do 1 double crochet into the stitch at the base of the chain. And this seems to be causing a little bit of confusion, so I thought I'd do a quick video on it and show you 2 different ways to do this. You can follow the pattern to the letter if you wish, or you can try a different way of doing something. So just remove this pattern a second. Right, for the purpose of this demonstration, again I'm using chunky yarn just so people can see a bit better, and I've got a foundation row of 12 stitches here. Now I'm going to demonstrate how the pattern is written. So what she's asking us to do is to chain 1, but we're not using this as a stitch. We're using this purely as a turning chain in this instance. And then she's asking you to place a stitch at the base of that chain. So that V there below, directly below the hook, this here is the turning chain, this here is the first stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch, pull up 1, yarn over through 2, and that completes stitch 1. And it's at this point where there can be a bit of confusion. I'll just take that hook out. This part here is the first stitch, and this is where I would put a stitch marker in to identify that stitch on the return journey. This here is the turning chain, so if we're going to then use this as our last stitch on our return journey, we are always going to inadvertently increase by default. So we need to be very careful where we're marking. So it's the top of the stitch is where we're marking, and I'll just continue the row so I can show you at the other end. So that's 1, 2, oh sorry about that, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. And then the next row she's given exactly the same instructions again. We do have a colour change which can actually confuse matters a little bit more. I'm not going to colour change at this point, I just want to kind of label what she's asking you to do. So we're turning our work. She's asking you to chain 1 to give a turning chain so that all the stitches in the next row are the correct height. But we're not using this turning chain as a stitch. It's purely a turning chain, nothing more than that. So she's asking you to place your first double crochet or single crochet if you're using American terminology in the first stitch. So we put that in there, and it's the top of this stitch that we need to identify again for our return journey. So although I've been crocheting quite a while now, I still identify, especially on a long piece of crochet, both ends with stitch markers. and that should ensure that you get a nice even count. So I'll just continue to the end. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and as you can see my marker is marking my 12th stitch. Leave the marker there, insert, pull up 1 through to finish. Leave the marker there until you do your chain 1 and new stitch, first stitch again in there, and immediately mark it, otherwise that's how you can create a little bit of confusion for yourself, is if you don't immediately mark the correct part of the stitch, it can cause confusion. A lot of patterns will have this particular method written in, where you're not using the turning chain of the short, because double crochet or single crochet in American is such a short stitch. If you use the turning chain as a stitch, it can be very hard to find. It doesn't mean you can't use it as a stitch, however, and I will show you how to do that in a while. I just don't want to confuse matters at the moment. So again, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and our marker is identifying stitch number 12. And again, once I'd done my chain 1, turned my piece of work and worked that first stitch, I would then move this stitch marker to mark the end. So I'm just going to quickly put that to one side 1 minute. This piece of work here is 12 rows of double crochet in English or single crochet in US terms, and as you can see at the end there's a few little bobbly bits, and those bobbly bits there are the chain 1, and because it sticks out a little bit, this can cause a little bit of confusion, and you can think that you've actually missed a stitch when actually you haven't. So when people are asking you to use the chain, sorry, as not as a stitch, but and to work into that first stitch, you will get a bumpy edge. This is perfectly normal, because the chain creates that bump. This one, however, it's still single crochet in US terminology or double crochet in English terminology, but there are no bumps down the side. We have a nice straight edge, and we'll have a straight edge because we are using the single crochet in US or double crochet in English terminology as the turning chain, and it gives a nice straight edge when joining. And this is a traditional way of crocheting. It's very, very helpful if you're joining motifs together, because you don't have the bump to contend with up the side. And again, you would use the stitch markers as you were before, but in this case you're marking in a slightly different place. So this next row I'm going to do is a row where we are going to use the turning chain as the first stitch. And what I tend to do is do the turning chain and then mark that straight away, because that is going to be our last stitch on our return journey. And once I've done that, I've marked it, I know it's done, I'm going to turn over. But because that stitch is our first stitch, we are going to then do our first completed crochet stitch into the second one along. So at the moment I have 1, 2 stitches done. So we do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. So this time I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to use the turning chain as my first stitch. So I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to mark it straight away so I don't lose it. If you don't, that's when you can have problems finding it when we come to put our hook in for the last stitch. So then we turn our work. We're not working in the first one this time because we are using the turning chain as a stitch. So we're going into the second one for our second stitch. So that's stitch 1, this is stitch 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's number 11, and number 12, it's a little bit harder to get into because it's not as easily identifiable. Again, if you're having bother, go down a stitch, a hook size, sorry, just to get in there, but then we will finish that stitch there. And you can see already in this short piece here where we were using the turning chain. When we weren't using the turning chain, sorry, as the first stitch, this creates a small bump, and this is where we can have confusion, where we think we've missed a stitch and we're putting an extra stitch in by mistake. And this piece here, you can see already, is quite flat when we're using the turning chain as a stitch. So either way, either method you choose to use stitch markers in both ends so that you can always identify that last stitch when you're completing your row, and that should keep your numbers correct. I hope all of that made sense. If it didn't, please shoot me a question and I'll answer it as best I can. It's sometimes easier. If I need to do another video, I will. I'm more than happy to do that. But I'm going to be doing a video shortly on the wave part of the pattern, and I will show you there how using the turning chain as a stitch can make a difference to your piece of work as well. But if you wish to follow the pattern to the letter, you are not using the turning chain as a stitch, and you are working into the first stitch straight away. You're not missing it. Hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. I'll speak to you soon. Happy hooking. Bye.